Oh, how nice to see you again. I see you've brought a friend, and another bottle of those excellent spirits. Please, come in. Make yourselves comfortable. Take a seat and warm yourself by the fire while I pour us a drink. You will be joining me, won't you? I do so enjoy these visits. Now, what brings you out on such a cold, damp night? What's that you say? Your friend has never heard the account of the bard at the bridge? Well, that will not do. No, sir, that will not do at all. We must remedy that. Let's see. Ah, yes. Here it is, right here. As I have said before, to immerse yourself in the story, I suggest you close your eyes and listen as I set the scene. This account begins in a tavern.
Another flagon? Another flagon of ale?
Asked the barmaid, repeating herself to the preoccupied former soldier. The tavern was not particularly crowded for this time of night. The various card games and conversations still drowned out any chance of being heard without raising one's voice to nearly a shout. The room smelled of roasted meat and pipe smoke. The wafts floating through the air developed the unmistakable scent of fine halfling weed. A massive stone fireplace roared, emitting its warm amber glow from the far end of the room. The tables and chairs were of the standard tavern fashion, simple yet sturdy. The strategically located bar sat across from the entrance, spanning the entire length of the wall. It was constructed from a single elven hardwood tree that had been felled by a bolt of lightning and split perfectly in two. The patrons were of the usual assortment, mainly traders or soldiers in training, with the odd sellsword adventurer or weary traveler mixed in among them. Situated at a triangular crossroads, the Dancing Dragon was the last vestige of human influence outside Thronefast. It sat beside the main trade route between the elves to the west and the dwarves to the north. This strategic location made it a welcome haven to any of the races on Terminus. It was routinely frequented by dwarves on their way to Thronefast or beyond, selling ore from the mines of Kadasa or other high-quality forged weapons and armor. Elves with bows or rune-enchanted items for barter could be seen haggling in a corner on any given night. Even the odd, well-behaved ogre would turn up now and again. This diversity is what attracted the recruits of Avendir's army.
Oi! Keep your hands to yourself.
Drinking at the Dancing Dragon had become a rite of passage for them. Young men, many never having traveled more than a half-day's ride from their place of birth, joined the royal army seeking adventure. One can only imagine their wonderment, not only seeing a dwarf for the first time, but seeing a half-dozen of them all singing at the tops of their lungs, all while drinking ungodly amounts of ale. On most occasions, the customary racial differences were left at the door. The owner, a hulking half-ogre and shrewd businessman named Grub, was extremely intolerant of anyone or anything that could potentially cut into his profits. The only thing he held in higher regard than his ale was his coin. The menu for this evening, last evening, or any evening for that matter, consisted of roasted meat, combined with an assortment of wild vegetables thrown together into a stew. The type of meat varied, the spice did not. The stew was seasoned to an ogre's taste, spicy enough to bring even those with the stoutest constitution to tears. This night was no different. As the barmaid placed down the bowl in front of him, the man could see an aged bard struggling with the lines to an ancient ballad. His bard was dressed in leather with a red, blue, and green cape. His pants and boots were badly worn, and his vest had stains from what looked like a week's worth of spilled food and drink. The feather in his cap was as devoid of plumage as the flagon was of ale that he waved to and fro. Directly in front of the bard, a table of four consisting of two soldiers and what looked like a noble's son and his sellsword were engaged in an intense card game. Renfrey, the son of a wealthy nobleman, was somewhat of a regular at the Dancing Dragon. He fancied himself as a trader, claiming to deal only the finest of goods and antiquities from across Terminus. He was also a degenerate gambler. Hindered by either the fog of drink or age, the bard began, then failed repeatedly, each time apologizing to those within earshot.
When the stars threw down their spears, and where the stars threw down their spears, and when the... Bloody hell!
Yelled a patron.
Sit down, old man!
Heckled another as the crowd began to boo. Pieces of food flew through the air in the direction of the bard from across the room. "Let the man finish," boomed the voice of the former soldier, his eyes still fixed on his bowl of stew. The room was now nearly silent as the patrons all looked in his direction. To them, he appeared to be merely a retired soldier or tradesman dressed in what looked like hunter's garb. "Please, go on," he added, looking up at the bard. The bard paused, trying to recall the words.
"Please, help me, sir,"
answered the bard. The man obliged. When the stars threw down their spears and watered heaven with their tears.
"Would you carry on? I'm afraid it's been so long,"
asked the bard, bowing his head. Did he smile at his work to see? Did he who make the lamb make thee? Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye dare frame thy fearful symmetry? The man finished. The bard then bowed humbly in his direction. Finally, in an annoyed manner, Renfrey offered forward a coin to the bard and shooed him away with a wave of his hand. The bard bowed his head to thank the man, then held up the coin to the light and scurried away towards the barmaid. Retrieving his pint of ale, the bard took a sip, grinned, then jumped and clicked his heels together, weaving his way in between the tables. The now content bard headed back towards the center of the room, whispering the words to a half-forgotten tune. The bard never saw the foot obstructing his path. The noble timed it perfectly. The bard stumbled forward as the flagon of ale flew from his hands. He grasped at the air with his right hand, then his left, in an effort to save the precious liquid. Both attempts were in vain as the flagon fell to the floor, streaming out what remained of its contents. A split second later, the bard followed the same path, with both arms crossed in front of him, and off balance, the misfortunate minstrel hit the ground face first with a resounding thud. The wind knocked out of him. The bard lay face down in the center of the room. The raucous laughter came faster than his breath.
"That's the best performance all night,"
he heard a patron yell above the noise of the crowd.
"Bravo, bravo, encore!"
The laughter now filled the room.
"What a waste of perfectly fine ale,"
remarked Renfrey as the roar died down. The aged bard, now humiliated, had reached his breaking point. He frantically reached for his flagon. His hands were flailing about the floor as if he were feeling his way through the dark. Snatching the flagon off the floor, the bard rose to his feet, let out a scream, and charged. He swung the mug wildly at Renfrey, who had shifted his chair so his back was now turned. Renfrey's sellsword, Martin, reacted quickly, lunging forward to pull his employer out of harm's way. The bard's desperate blow did not miss the mark entirely, as the heavy wooden flagon grazed the noble's son just above the ear. All four occupants of the table kicked their chairs out from under them and stood.
"Seize him!"
exclaimed Renfrey. He was now pointing at the bard with one hand while the other rubbed the side of his head just above his ear. He could feel the swelling beginning to form and the warm, wet liquid on his fingers. He removed his hand from the wound and stared at the bloody revelation. He furiously snatched a knife from the table and screamed.
"Hold out his hand! Hold out his hand!"
Martin had knocked the bard to his knees and was now leaning over him, pressing the bard's body against the edge of the table.
Please, kind sir, mercy, mercy! I don't know what came over me. Please, good sir,"
cried the bard hysterically. Martin obliged his employer and pinned the bard's arms to the table, holding him firmly by the wrists.
"Perhaps I should cut his tongue out and do us all a favor,"
added Renfrey with a vile snicker.
"Oh, the gods help me! Please, mercy!"
cried the bard, closing his eyes and flinching in expectancy.
"No, I think a blow for blow will suffice,"
answered Renfrey. He raised the knife straight up, nearly above his head as the bard wept with his forehead now pressed against the table. Renfrey drove the knife down forcefully, and with a flash of steel and rush of air, the blade was split clean in half. The force of the cold dark steel longsword knocking the knife from Renfrey's hand in the process. Shaking his hand, Renfrey focused a wide-eyed stare at the man before him, then panned his view down onto the table where the longsword blade now extended. The tip of the sword rested safely between the bard's hands, spanning the width of the table. The two soldiers reacted by beginning to draw their swords. The older of the two, a dark-skinned southerner, placed his hand over the hilt of his comrade's sword and shook his head. The ginger-haired, fresh recruit looked him in the eye, then followed his stare back to the longsword and the dwarven runes etched upon it. He attempted to draw his sword again, but the southerner held firm, shaking his head more vigorously this time, accentuating his insistence that they take no action.
How dare you draw your sword on me?
Stated Renfrey.
Do you know who I am?
Who and what you are is of no importance, answered the man in leather as his eyes scanned the group before him. You will do well to pay heed to your comrade, he continued, now addressing the younger soldier. The younger soldier's mouth opened, but he was left speechless, his face flushed with embarrassment.
Well, then you will learn I am not a man to be trifled with. Martin, teach this man a lesson,
answered Renfrey. His sellsword released the bard and began to draw his sword from its scabbard. The bard slumped to his knees and cowered beneath the table with his back against one of its legs. Grob appeared from behind the soldiers and stepped in front of Renfrey and Martin.
There will be no swordplay. No blood will be shed in my place of business,
Grob ordered.
Blood has already been drawn,
answered Renfrey, showing his blood-stained fingers.
If this continues, you will no longer be welcome at the Dancing Dragon,
stated Grob.
And that goes for all of you,
he added, looking over his shoulder at the man in leather.
My father will hear of this,
yelled Renfrey.
Perhaps he should hear of the coin you have spent at the local brothel,
replied Grob.
Very well. Gather your things, Martin. I'm taking my business elsewhere,
finished Renfrey. Sheathing his weapon, the man in leather watched intently as Martin and Renfrey gathered their coin and headed for the door. Just a geezer with an antique sword is all, said the younger soldier, now standing at the bar. I'd show him a thing or two, I would have.
He'd have slaughtered the lot of you before his stew got cold,
interrupted Grob. Bollocks, replied the soldier.
Did you see how that blade splintered the knife? That antique sword is cold, dark steel. And that geezer is a survivor of the Battle of Cargold. Grob here is right. I just might have saved your life tonight, son,
interjected the older soldier.
They say he's killed more men than the plague, that one. You'd be wise to steer clear of him, especially when his blood is up, added Grob.
Who is he? What is he called?
Asked the southerner. You may call me Jurich, he said in a soft tone as he knelt to console the bard. The bard, still flustered, vigorously wiped his eyes and nose with his sleeve.
I am Quintus, and forever in your debt, Sir Knight,
responded the bard between breaths. It has been quite some time since someone has called me that.
My mind is not what it once was, and I'm afraid I've become far too fond of the drink,
replied Quintus, lowering his head in shame.
But I can still recognize one of your kind to come to the aid of an old drunken fool like me.
Quintus raised his head to look Jurich in the eye, then lowered it again.
There was a time,
stated Quintus somewhat under his breath. About an hour until midnight, I suspect, answered Jurich.
You misheard me, kind sir,
added Quintus. He was now speaking more slowly and clearly.
I said there was a time. We were young once, really young, and all heads turned our way.
Unfortunately, that time has long since passed, added Jurich as both men rose to their feet.
In any event, Sir Jurich, I meant what I said. I am forever in your debt, and a bard always keeps his promise,
finished Quintus. Hearing that last phrase, Jurich's eyes glazed over as he stared through the bard. His mind took him to another time and place, where a young soldier with his whole life ahead of him stood on a bridge.